Hotep. I'm Dr. Gloria Lattimore Peace, host and producer of OmniU Presents the H3O Art of Life show. Today we are here to talk about women at work. Heavy lifting. That's the title of the show. The title of the book that we're going to be talking about the contents of is Lifting as They Climbed, mapping a history of black women on Chicago's South Side. And I have with me one of the authors of the book, Essence McDowell. The other author is Miriam Kaba. And I'm just thrilled over this book. I was thrilled when I heard that it existed in the world. And so I just want to talk to you about the inspiration for the project, how it was decided that you should look at about 34 black women who were active on the South Side working on behalf of our community.
Okay. So, first I would love to say thank you so much for having me today. The origins of the book is my co-author, Miriam Kaba. She's an activist and educator and organizer in so many ways. And so we had worked together on various projects. We have curated exhibits, also organized in collaboration. And so over the years, we've also just become friends. And so in the fall of 2017, she had sent out a calling together some black women to talk about black women's history. And she had been working on researching black women's history for decades. And she had started kind of working on a project that connected the stories to geographical locations in Chicago, and kind of was ready to, either part with the project or see, who would be willing to help and support. And as soon as she started to mention a particular woman, Mary Jane Richardson Jones, I felt like, how is it possible that I've lived here for over 10 years and I had no idea, about someone who has such a huge contribution to Black Chicago? And there was just, for some reason, it was beyond me, in the sense that I just felt immediately connected to the project and the idea of it and how necessary it was that this be something in the world.
I'm glad that you did this. And are all of the people in this book deceased? So you're looking at women who have worked in Chicago on behalf of the community, but they are no longer with us. Are there any of these women who are presently with us?
So the only one in the book that's still alive is Diane Nash.
Okay.
She's still living and still here in Chicago.
All right.
But she's the only one out of the 48 women that we include in Lifting as They Climbed. She's the only one. And this is predominantly because much of the book, the women are born in the late 19th century and into the 20th century. So their lives take place during the 1900s predominantly.
Okay. Well, I thought of, the reason I asked the question is because I thought of some women that I would like to have had included in here, and I thought, well, maybe they're not here because these are women who have since passed on. But at any rate, you had a reason for selecting the women that you did select. So how was that process? What was the selection process?
So essentially we did tons of research. We read the stories of just so many women's lives and what they built, what they created, the institutions they left behind. And then the selection process was essentially based on whether we could find a location to pinpoint them in. So Lifting as They Climbed is a guidebook, and it takes you on a tour of 33 locations that speaks to the lives of these 48 black women who were artists, educators, organizers, really influential in building Chicago community to what it is today. And so if we couldn't tie them to a particular location, it was really hard to include them in the book. Yeah. And also, 48 women, Miriam and I, when we sat down to talk about who we had to include and really had that rigorous session around, the names that made it to the book, it was really hard. This is by no means an expansive history. Yeah, yes, this is by no means so many women that deserve to be in Lifting as They Climbed, but we created it as a starting point in hopes that folks will read the book and get excited about Black women's history, get excited about the things that they don't know in their own communities, and then take on the call to expand the project in the ways that they felt, necessary.
Exactly, and that's a good. Someone had to do this, and it had to start somewhere, and you couldn't include the whole world,
Right.
so you had to delineate it, and I'm happy that you did. I see so many women in here that I'm familiar with, but I want to first talk about the woman who is still alive, because I think that that's important that we shine a spotlight on her. Talk to me about this one.
So Diane Nash, she was a civil rights organizer. She actually went to Hyde Park High School, and so we include Hyde Park High School as the location where you learn about her story. And she was pretty much influential in the civil rights movement, and an activist and organizer. And she was at the Chicago History Museum, and I didn't get a chance to go see and meet her, but I think as one of the women who are still alive that I really have to do a better job of making sure I reach out to her and communicate with her, even share a book of Lifting as They Climbed with her, because of her profound contributions to the movement and just to Chicago as a whole.
I'd like to find her.
Yeah,
And
she's here.
Okay, well, you will help us to connect.
Yeah.
Thank you. I'm just going to start early in the book. Of course, we know Mamie Till Mobley. Mm-hmm. And we know her principally because of her son, Emmett Till, and the devastating effect his murder had on our community. I applaud her for having the courage to allow the public to see what had been done to him, so that we would realize the extent to which adversaries would go to harm our young people. And I beyond that, I really didn't know much about her. Mm-hmm. So if you can fill me in on some other things.
Okay, Mamie Till Mobley, I think what people most don't know is that she was an organizer. In order to get tens of thousands of folks to pay attention to the story of her son and the murder of her son, that she had to connect with organizations and be a part of a larger movement at the time to bring awareness to the violence against Black bodies during the 1900s. And so she spoke with newspapers, and she really was a community organizer in the sense that she got an international response, an international call towards the vicious violence that was happening to Black folks around the nation through the story of her son. And so for her to not just be the mother, of Emmett Till, but to be the reason why his story gained notoriety, that we still know Emmett Till to this day,
right.
That she is first and foremost someone who went into the streets to speak to community leaders. Right. She also built with organizations as well. And so we wanted to highlight and uplift that part of her journey because, as a mother, women are so many things. They're
right.
not, just a mother. And for her to have lost her son in such a tragic way,
right.
She could have had any type of response.
Right.
She could have responded in a grief way, which would be absolutely understandable, withdrawal from the community and really be hurt and upset. But instead she expanded her reach. She expanded the relationships that she had.
Right.
And so we wanted to uplift that part of her story.
Okay.
And the church that's on State Street, I'm like, we're living around so much history in Chicago that sometimes it just amazes me. I'm not from Chicago, I'm from New Jersey, but just to learn how profound and how tangible history is around us, I think that the church in which the services for Emmett Till happened, when I stood in front of that church and kind of touched the building, it was a prolific moment. You hear about history in a way that's kind of static. And so to see it alive, to understand the story of this woman that, people only know because of the pictures of her son and the story of her son, but she as a person was a dynamic individual organizer and community leader herself.
Right. And her monument is at the Borough Cemetery.
Oh,
yeah, so if you go to 127th near Cicero to the Borough Cemetery, when you first enter, that's one of the first monuments that you see.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, and it's interesting also to know where these people's remains are, if in fact they have, burial sites. Because that's one of the things that disturbs me deeply, is that we take our people to cemeteries and leave them there. Most people don't like to visit cemeteries, and I understand that, because it brings back memories that they'd rather not have. But I think that even though I personally don't think that the remains, that anything more than the remains, certainly not the person, is in the grave, it is just good to honor their memory, by visiting, by cleaning up around, by placing a monument, by, remembering certain special days in their lives, so that the rest of the community will know that this person was revered and loved. And you can see the difference, you can tell the difference between a cemetery in our community and cemeteries in other communities, where they have, tall standing monuments, and where it appears that they are being cared for more often, better maintained. So I think knowing where these people's remains are gives an opportunity that may be included in your next volume. Yeah, you might go to, not only to the place where you associate with them, but if someone cared to pay tribute, they would know where they could go to do that.
Yeah, I think the only one of the main locations that we have that's in the cemeteries and additional sites of interest for Ida B. Wells and how she's buried in Oakwood Cemetery. But outside of that, I think that it is important to honor, the lives and contributions of these Black women during their life and then after as well. What we found in the research of Lifting as They Climbed is that the institutions that they built in many cases have been completely demolished, and what remains are sometimes fields, sometimes parking lots.
Right.
And one would really have to begin to question, like, why in the city of Chicago are they allowed to demolish history?
Well, they just erase us, and I in fact, I have a nephew who is going to take me on a tour of some places that I'm curious about, because I haven't been to them recently, because it seems to me that everywhere I was has turned into a condominium. I mean, are you kidding me? My school was here. We lived here, we lived there, and so things that were familiar are no longer a part, and I'm still here, and they're erasing the chalkboard with me still sitting in the classroom.
And I think that, that has been one of the most difficult things to grapple with throughout Lifting as They Climbed. Like, for instance, Ada S. McKinley. To this day, Ada S. McKinley's social services has a profound impact. It's been 100 years of her original institution still providing for hundreds and thousands of families throughout Illinois. And the original home of the Southside Settlement House, which was where she started Ada S. McKinley services, that was the original site. It's on IIT's campus, and there's just a tiny little marker.
Right. It almost you wouldn't know it was there.
You wouldn't know it was there. I stood there when I first went, and I'm just looking around like, but how? Because she has such a prolific contribution to this day.
Right.
Even Ida B. Wells, the Negro Fellowship League that she built, for which was a library, a space for resources for community members, in the same way that the Jane Addams Hull House was, but that's no longer there. There's a parking lot there. And then there's homes on another location that it existed in. And so it's just like, I think that maybe if people knew more about these women and about their lives, then the locations and institutions that they built would have a standing chance, perhaps.
Well, it certainly there would be some protests. I was in Roseland recently, and I was coming down Michigan, and I noticed that there was this huge building that was originally, I think, a department store. And it's just in ruins. It looks like the Roman ruins or the Greek ruins. It's just, and there's no reason for it to be there. And I'm told that it has been there for years. Now why is it that you can leave a monstrosity in the midst of a community and take down something that has historical value, because this commercial property does not have historical value
At all.
and so the same funds that you can use to remove things that are valuable to our community, you could use to remove things that are an eyesore in the community. So somebody is making conscious decisions about the architecture and just the environment in which you will live. And architecture and environment affects you. You know, they're not just things that you pass by, but the milieu in which you find yourself has an impact. If you are living in beauty, you tend to feel beauty. You feel beautiful. And if you're living in things that are not attractive and in fact ugly, then you can't really feel at your best. So that's a good question. Why are we missing? Now, Dr. Margaret Burroughs still has institutions that stand. Her home is still sitting there on Michigan. And I think if anybody tried to move that, a lot of people would be up in arms, because Dr. Burroughs is probably one of the best knowns in this book. The contribution she made is very visible and very well known.
Yeah.
And the heavy lifting that she did, not only in just founding institutions, but in finding and essentially founding artists, encouraging people who had promise and potential to pursue their gifts and to develop them and to become, you know, people who are now recognized and revered in our community. What do you think about Dr. Margaret Burroughs?
Dr. Margaret Burroughs is an absolutely prolific leader. I think institution builder in our community. Not only do we include Dr. Burroughs, the original site of the DuSables Museum, but we also include the South Side Community Arts Center. Yes.
And our house across the street.
Her house is right across the street. So we include those two on the tour as some, you know, visible connections. But yeah, Dr. Burroughs' impact is extremely prevalent. I think that throughout almost every talk that I've had, or just in community conversations, no other name comes up more than Dr. Burroughs. And so what I recognize is that not only did she build, you know, one of the nation's longstanding art and history museums, one of the first art and history museums in the nation, but she also, I think, had a deep community reach. That wasn't just like, oh, she knew community leaders and she was in touch with those who were active. Like on a communal presence, like when I talk to people today, people still say, I remember Dr. Burroughs, her speaking to me. The stories are personal. And so I think impact, when I'm investigating and digesting these stories of Black women's histories, it is what you build and what you leave behind 100%. But it's also the relationships that you build and the way that you interact with the community members that you're a part of that leave an even richer history, that speak to more of who she was and her character. But I think just what she did and what she accomplished by establishing the DuSables, she was also a lifetime educator. I learned through this research that she taught in prisons. Then she was an artist. So on top of that, she's doing this printmaking and she's doing all of this creative work and institutional work and communal work, and putting that all together makes such a dynamic being that we will remember for years to come. So I would agree of the women, she is most certainly one of the most known.
Right.
But Gwendolyn Brooks is in there too. So.
Oh yes, they were friends. So you might as well talk about Gwendolyn.
Gwendolyn Brooks as the poet laureate, also just of Chicago. The location that we include in our tour is a former home that she lived in, and so it is, I can't think of it, it's on Martin Luther King Boulevard. And the conversation that we speak to is that one of the poems that Gwendolyn Brooks wrote was about a kitchenette. And so she lived in this home that was, during the Great Migration, what scrupulous landlords would do is that they would cut up homes into smaller, so one apartment would become 3, 4, or 5 apartments. And so Gwendolyn Brooks, as a renowned poet, really wrote this poem, Kitchenettes, that speaks to, like, the smells that come through, the relationships that they're building through these walls and these close quarters that they had to live in. And, we know Gwendolyn Brooks in the story about her being a prolific writer and a profound writer and someone who contributed to the creative canon in such a significant way. But also her story speaks to the history of Chicago and what happened when folks came up from the Great Migration, when hundreds of thousands into the millions of Black families, Black individuals came to Chicago, what was here for them, And even though there wasn't much, right, in Gwendolyn Brooks' case, she's living with her family in a small, cramped apartment building, but also then blossomed into one of the most renowned poets of our time, It's such this beautiful story of what they were up against versus what they actually built, what they actually created, and what they did with their lives.
And her daughter is still busy doing art and doing, I don't know, she still has her chocolate chips organization that deals with children and art. But Gwendolyn Brooks spoke to us, as you mentioned, the poem about kitchenettes. Gwendolyn Brooks spoke to us in ways that, you talk about heavy lifting, a short poem that could buoy you up, could lift you up, could just fill you with so much joy and so much inspiration. When she wrote about nothing but a plain Black boy, I used to read that poem in places where I would give talks and whatnot. This was a young man who had died, and it was to him on the way to Lincoln Cemetery. You can feel it. You are in the motorcade. You can feel, when she wrote dedicated the poem to Paul Robeson, and she gave me what is always my defense about when I'm meddling in my children's affairs. She says, we are each other's business. We are each other's harvest. We are each other's magnitude and bond. And I just let them know, listen, your business is my business. And I am going to know what is going on in my family, and I am going to get in it if there is a place that I think I'm supposed to be. And so don't tell me what not to say and what not to do, because we are each other's business. Gwendolyn Brooks gave me that ammunition. So it's just, we, of course, recently had Toni Morrison to leave us to join the Ancestors. She was an international darling in the literary field, for me, an artist of all kinds, even though she didn't necessarily deal with the visual arts. But she was New York. We had Gwendolyn Brooks. And Gwendolyn Brooks, her work is of the same caliber. These were women who had vision, who saw and who felt deeply and could sum it up, and you could go to it. You could just leaf through Maud Martha or lead through one of those books and find exactly what you needed. It's like going through the Bible looking for the scripture that speaks to your heart and says what you can't find the words to say. So I'm very fond of writing because I like to read.
Oh yes, me too. I am too. I'm at heart definitely a writer first. I've been, this book was my first opportunity to publish just in a very public way. I've been a closet writer, and writers like Toni Morrison, really, and Gwendolyn Brooks, they really do an excellent job of showing us our reflections, of really giving our community voice and vision, and also giving us the opportunity to understand the nuances, you know, giving us the opportunity to see various depths of ourselves and our people. And they, you know, will forever, forever go down in history for that. And on a personal level, being excellent writers, having this ability to use words to, like you said, sprout wings, to use words to ground us in our history and to ground us in our people and ourselves in ways that I think, like, you know, I don't know any, you know, people that I love more other than writers. And, you know, when we say Toni Morrison's name and we say Gwendolyn Brooks' name, you know, they have left so much for us,
right?
You know, so
right.
they are not here anymore, but we can turn a page. Their pages remain as guides, as pathways, as bridges, you know. And I think, like, just to be able to now be a writer, to say that I'm a writer, but also to have something that I leave behind, so young people have more of a sense of agency, of power, of a sense of community, and understanding, like, who they come from, you know. I talked to a lot of young people this year about Black history, and I went to talk to them about lifting as they climbed, and talk to them about some of the women, Fannie Hagan Emanuel, and you know, even Lorraine Hansberry in that larger context, but lesser known women like this pastor Mary Greens Evans, and what they told me is that they're still only learning about 4 or 5. For like the you know, the Rosa Parks, maybe Harriet Tubman, they're not learning Black history.
Absolutely.
And that killed me. That was like they're not in 2019. They're not learning Black history, and they're not like you know. I found it hard to swallow, because I imagined that we're in such a technological world. We have our cell phones. We could, you know, go on our computers, our laptops, but they're not learning basic Black history. They're not learning beyond these 5 seminal folks. They're not learning communal history. And it just made me think, like, there's so much more work for us to do, even though we've been doing the work, even though we've been doing the heavy lifting.
But you know, when I think you have Charlemagne Rollins in here, she was my librarian.
She was your librarian?
When I was in grade school, I was so fortunate, so blessed to go to a grade school where I had conscious teachers who had us to go to the library, to the Hall Branch Library on 48th and Michigan, and do reports on what was then called Negro history. And Charlemagne Robinson was am I calling her name right? Is it
Charlemagne Rollins? Yeah, she's
Rollins?
in here. Yeah,
that's right, Rollins. Rollins was our librarian, and she had taken it upon herself. She had folders, and they had one page, one 8.5 by 11 typewritten page, and it would have a biography of the life of someone, a Black person who was, you know, accomplished in some way. And so we had to write these reports, and once weekly, we had to write the reports and come in and read our reports, submit our reports at school to our teachers. And so, and then of course I had one teacher who would take groups of us to churches, and we would perform poetry. I loved Paul Ernst Dunbar. So I was always assigned to do something by Dunbar. And so we would do spirituals, we would sing, we would do poetry, always from our own culture. And so I learned to love my culture, my people, our language. I fell in love with being Black and being among Black people. And so as I grew, I was an avid reader, and I continued to read. And I learned so much from reading on my own, you know, because once you get introduced, you know, you can develop a preference for reading as to doing anything else. And I didn't have all the distractions. I didn't have to do a cell phone.
Right.
You know, I didn't even have to do a TV for years.
Yeah.
You know, we had a record player, so I could listen to jazz music and jazz radio, which was what we played in our house. But the thing is, what I'm rambling around trying to get to is that I fell in love with writers because they expanded my world. And then when I became a professor at the university, I learned something that makes me know who you are. And I knew who you were in terms of your function in the community. You, my dear, are not just a writer. You are a griot. The function of a griot is to remind a people of their history. In an African community, there were always griots. Their single purpose was to remember the history of the people, and they would be called upon periodically to come forward and to recite the history of the people to the people. Now, there was a great responsibility with this because they had to get the history right, you know, because there were people in the community that also knew the history.
Yeah.
And so if a griot made a flagrant error, there was a penalty associated with it. So understand your awesome responsibility. You are not just a writer. See, a writer has choices. They can go off and, you know, and do whatever they feel like it. They don't really bear responsibility. But when you decide to do things like this, my dear, is a responsibility. It has to be accurate. It has to be precise. And when you are called upon to come forth and be on Dr. Peace's H3O show, then you have to recite to us our history because we have called you to come and tell us our history.
Yeah.
So understand what you are and what your function is, and we expect to see more of this from you because you didn't stumble into this. You were called to do this work.
I want to say thank you. You know, I never thought of myself as a griot, but I do feel the responsibility, and I do feel honored every single time I'm able to talk about these women's lives. And it is I think that also the way that it happened, the way that I came into the meeting with Miriam and decided to take on the project, it felt like it was beyond me in ways in hindsight I could only understand. Like there are moments where you say yes to something and that yes comes from a place of like response, oh, you can do it, you have the skills to do it, or it comes from a yes like, oh, I know this person, I want to do it. But this particular project has felt on a spiritual level, like divine, you know, like I'm supposed to have done this project. And when we did it, I'm so used to like doing like work in a way that like I do something, then I move on to the next thing. This has been 2 years of my life, and this is years beyond this, that I'm willingly saying, like, I surrendered to Lifting as They Climb to these 48 Black women. We were lucky enough because of the response to Lifting as They Climb to get a deal with Haymarket Publishing. And so we're extending Lifting as They Climb to include women on the west side of Chicago, because there are stories there that we need to know.
Oh, let me tell you, that was probably one of the first things that came to mind, because in order to access this book, I had to go online.
Oh, it's in the libraries, though.
I didn't know that in time.
Oh, okay.
So what I did know how to do was to find it online and read something about it. And when I saw that you were looking at the Chicago South Side, I immediately knew that somebody, and I hope I'm not calling my own name because I'm real busy, but somebody has to go to the West Side, because the West Side may still have, but certainly did have, women on the West Side, and not just women, but women and men on the West Side, who definitely need to be researched. So I'm not trying to add to your responsibilities. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But I'm just putting it out there.
I mean, we signed a book deal, so I'm 100% responsible for taking myself to the West Side. And
Okay.
I've started to do the research, met phenomenal women like Bernetta Howell. Yeah,
My friend.
Oh, that's your friend? Yeah,
Yes.
I mean, telling me her life story, I'm just like, I mean, after all of these stories, I cannot be surprised at the way in which we work.
And ask her to tell you about other women, because she knows them.
Yeah.
We know them. We know Marion Stamps. Cabrini Green, let me tell you, Cabrini Green was a morass. And it was a difficult environment for black people, and particularly black women with families, to try to raise their children. And Marion Stamp stood against the city, the Chicago Housing Authority, and anybody else when it came to the kinds of rules and regulations and the neglect of that public housing. And that's a huge public housing. Well, there's not a lot of it left, but there was a huge public housing project. And Marion Stamps, let me tell you, Marion would meet with the street organizations, which everybody else was terrified of. But, you know, she would even draw the line on them. You just can't be, I got children in here. You know, you just can't do anything that you want to do. And I had her come to talk to my class. I was privileged to have one of her children in my class. So if I can help you find, maybe I can help you find, hopefully I can, because I think they have destroyed the little organization that she had. You know, she's been deceased for a while. But Marion Stamps immediately comes to mind, but I think most people would try to put her on the north side. But she's north and west in my view.
Okay.
And I would not have a book about women who lifted as they climbed, and I figure out how to have Marion Stamps in it.
Okay.
You know, we had Jean Lewis, who is now deceased, and Bernetta will tell you about her. You know, so it has been, to have been in the company of those women as I was able to be is such a privilege, because these were women who, though they had families, it's kind of amazing to look back at that. They had families and they were still leaders in the community. They were still confronting all the forces in the community that were oppressive. They were still, you know, standing all the community administrators down when it came to the education of their children and the practices in the public schools and the practices in CHA. So it will be your pleasure to do this work, because you will have and do it before we can't be here to help you.
Okay.
Because you know that eyewitness testimony is always better than Google. You know, the person who walked with those people and knew them personally and can give you personal stories and anecdotes and you'll probably run into Lucy Chappelle, who is still over there on the West Side doing tremendous work. So we're gone but not forgotten in some cases. You know, some of us are gone, but none of us will be forgotten by those of us who continue to exist and to have a voice that we can speak of. I love that.
Well, thank you so much. I just got a history lesson on the West Side, just in that
I used
small
to live
session.
on
I
the
really
West
appreciate
Side.
that.
I was over there with doing all the stuff.
Yeah, so far it's been different. You know, I think that when we were doing the research for Lifting As They Climb for the South Side, it's a abundance of information just because of the way that, you know, things settled on the South Side. Most folks moved to the South Side as
Right.
opposed to the West
They
Side.
came to the South
They came
Side
to the
first.
South Side first.
Yeah.
And so the research on the West Side has been a little different. It's been a little difficult, and I think that it's pushing me to be more grounded in community, to have conversations so that we can gather oral histories and to understand
Yes.
that griot nature that we still
No,
have.
you got to say griot, because see,
Griot.
that's a French word.
Okay, griot.
And we don't do
The
anything. We
griot
don't do
nature.
anything with that T.
Okay, it's my,
And
my
we
accent.
do the long O. We don't do the O.
The griot.
The griot.
Okay.
That's who you are.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm interested in any names that you can give, and anyone who, you know, catches the show and says, oh, I really know that someone that had this profound effect on the West Side should be included. These black women just deserve to have their stories told.
Right.
And as one individual, you know, my co-author, she's in New York, so she's on the East Coast. So the West Side is you know, I'm taking this on
Right.
and always looking for leads, always looking for folks who can tell me more, who can
Right.
point, even if
Right.
they don't have information, but the names, that
Right.
would be extremely helpful.
Right.
Because we're working on that like now, and in the next couple months, I'll be, you know, wrapping up the research. So
Right.
any names, any information, I'm
Right.
open, and I hope people will reach out to me and
Right.
find me to tell me some
Yeah,
of those.
I want to see you do this. It's very important to me. I noticed that you associated Vivian Harsh with the Hall Branch Library, the George C. Hall Library. But her collection is at the Woodson.
Right, right.
Why did you make this association?
So Vivian, she was a lead curator at the Hall Branch. That was essentially where
I didn't
she.
see her over there.
Oh yeah, yeah, she was there. She was there. She was definitely influential in getting the Vivian Harsh collection started while she was at the Hall Library.
Okay.
She's one of the reasons I think that. Charlemagne Rollins her and Charlemagne Rollins together were like a really powerful duo, because you know, while Charlemagne was really focused on children's literature,
right.
Vivian Harsh was really building the African American sections, the information that was accessible there, and so she was there. She launched like a lecture series while she was there. She also like had a history club, a Negro history club. She started a lot of things while she was at the Hall Branch, and so we couldn't necessarily have the Hall Branch without her. And then also the demographics of the tour, we wanted folks to be on the South Side, and we paired some stories. That's why we paired Vivian Harsh there with Charlemagne Rollins, and also she was the director of the Hall Branch. So
Flashing signs to me tell me we're running out of time, and I see all these people. I see Addie Wyatt, who is very uncommon for a woman who has a famous husband to be famous in her own right. But Addie Wyatt was one of those, and well respected. And I saw the little warrior.
yeah.
Willie Barrow.
Willie Barrow.
She's with her little self being, and she was a powerful woman.
Yeah, and so many people don't even know about
Jackson
Willie Barrow.
lived on the south side of Chicago, and of course, you know, what you gonna say? What can you say about Mahalia Jackson? I mean, you couldn't have a funeral ceremony and not have a Mahalia Jackson song in there and really lift people's spirits and really help them to have a cathartic experience. Go ahead, say something.
I was like, the all-star collection of Lifting As They Climb.
There's so much in this book in so little time.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many women. There's so many women in here that, you know, that Fannie Barrier Williams, you know, institution builder. She was one of the reasons Providence Hospital got built, you know.
Really?
Yeah,
I didn't know that.
It's so many women that we tried to include.
Catherine Dunham.
Catherine Dunham, we made sure to include her in the, you know, the contribution she made to arts and performance and Black
Right.
art and expression.
Right.
I wish that we could just kind of like list them out really fast if you guys didn't know. If you didn't know, about Alice Browning and her starting the Negro Story magazine at a time where, few publishers were trying to publish Black working authors. And she was the founder of the International Writers Conference. The list goes on and on. If I could just have like a little snippet
Yes.
of all of our women. Arizona Drains is one that we include. She was a blind singer, pianist, and musician. Practiced since she was 6 years old. And although she was blind, women, and for some of them, we couldn't even find an image of them.
Right.
So to tell their stories and to really put it into a text, was necessary. To make sure that we have an online platform was necessary, because it has to live beyond us and
Right.
even into the digital world, because many of them were born in the century where there wasn't cell phones and selfies.
Right.
So the sites and learn about these Black women, because we've been doing the work, as you said.
Yes, we've
for
been doing
hundreds
the
and
heavy
hundreds and
lifting.
thousands of years.
Right, right.
Yeah.
And not through doing it. We're not by any means,
No.
as long as there are Black people and there is a Black community, the women will always do their share and more to do the heavy lifting. And it's a pleasure to know that there are some young people who appreciate that, who value that, and who want to join them in doing the heavy lifting of lifting them up.
Yeah.
Because that's very important, that we show that we have reverence. And not everybody who is worthy of mention built an institution. There are many, many women who, their numbers are legion, whom, if we had a way to just pay tribute to them, we certainly should.
Absolutely.
And I thank you so much for being here, Essence. I love your
Thank
name.
you.
Whoever had the good sense to give it to you was right.
Thank you so much, Dr. Peace. It's my honor to be here to speak with you and just to be a part of this lineage.
Well, thank you so much for being my guest.
Thank you.